Hello and welcome to Film Companion South. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Vaazhl, which has just dropped on Sony Live. Now, this film has been directed by Arun Prabhu Purushothaman. It's his first film after Aravi, and he has managed something that very few filmmakers in the world have managed to do. He's made a second film that is actually better than his first. Now, whether you like the movie in its entirety or not, at every point there is so much happening, and there is so much in terms of what's untold and the preference of visuals over words. Aravi is a very talky movie, right? This is much more visual. Even when there's high drama happening, you see stuff and you sense stuff rather than hear stuff. And they're so much in control over the medium that at every point it is stunning to watch. The film opens with an image from a scene that will actually happen much later. Now, what we see at the beginning is that there is a man. He seems to be underwater, and one of his feet has gotten stuck between two rocks. Now, this is a metaphor with a capital M, and it means that this man is trapped in real life. Like he's trapped here in between the rocks, he is trapped in real life, and he has to find a way to free himself. He has to find a way to live, to Vaazhl. And the director seems to be saying that to live, to Vaazhl, to really Vaazhl, you have to free yourself from where you're stuck. You have to free yourself from the traps of daily life. Now, what are these traps you have to free yourself from? Now, they are the traps of daily life. Now, take the man we saw in the very first scene, in that metaphoric scene. His name is Prakash and he's played by Pradeep Antony. Now, this is the actor who played the television executive in Aravi, and here he has a similarly pressure-filled modern-day job, which is in IT. He has a girlfriend. Well, I guess we can call her one. All she does is she keeps guilt-tripping him. He does not seem to be very happy with her. He does not seem to be very happy at home either, where he lives with his parents and his sister. Now, he is an Amma Pillai. He is very scared of his mom. He's afraid to bunk even a day at office because he's afraid that if his mom finds out, all hell will break loose. In short, he is leading a robotic existence. And then suddenly things change when Prakash meets a woman that we know only as Yatrama because she is the mother of a boy named Yatra. Now, Yatrama is played by TJ Bhanu, who is absolutely brilliant. Now, this is a film that's filled with many philosophies. One of these philosophies is that the people that you meet along the road of life have the potential to change your life. And accordingly, Yatrama changes Prakash's life. Now, you get this feeling that she is a femme fatale character from a Hollywood noir film because she seems to be toying with Prakash, who seems to be this typical innocent, what we'd call in Tamil, a baker-like character. She seems to be using him, and yet she doesn't seem to be. We're not really clear. Anyway, from his robotic existence, Prakash now hops onto an exhilarating roller coaster ride, and so does the audience. Now, the screenplay is super innovative at this point. Now, what usually happens when there are two people whose stories we have to follow, right? At least till the point that they meet. The film will first show us the scene with one person, then it will show us a scene with the other person, then we'll return to the first person, then we'll go to the scene with the other person. This is so that the audience doesn't lose track of either track, so that when they meet, we will know both their tracks and the tracks are meeting. But what Arun Prabhu Purushothaman does here is that, oh God, I just realized that his name acronyms to app. I don't know why that is important, but that's there. Anyway, what he does here is that he follows the story from Prakash's POV for the longest time. Okay, Yatrama is not even present. And now he suddenly switches to Yatrama's point of view and Prakash vanishes from the scene. So we follow the story from her point of view for the longest time, and then these two things converge, these two tracks converge. It's beautiful. It's probably too soon to say this, but Raymond Eric Krasta and Arun Prabhu Purushothaman are probably the best editor, director-writer combination working in Tamil cinema today. So much of the film is structured both from a cinematic point of view and from a narrative point of view so that we discover things as Prakash discovers things. And the editing emphasizes this constantly. It's about how the scenes unfold. It's about how the little inserts are put into the larger scenes. It's about how scenes jump from one event to another in about 1 or 2 minutes, and yet there is this constant sense of a kind of jagged continuity. What I mean by jagged continuity is it's like a little winding. It's not like a straight road. The road itself, the road of life, seems to be going a little up and down. And this is not I'm not saying the movie is trying to do this. I'm just saying that's the sense. That's like if you draw a graph, that's the kind of stuff you'll get. Now, War is a road movie and it can be seen as three different parts. I'm not talking about the three-act structure of Hollywood that we keep talking about. It's not that. It's just that this film has three separate sections, three separate parts. The first part has to do with Prakash and Yatrama, and we are never sure what her motives are, what she's after, what she's going to do. There is a constant sense of dread and suspense. The atmosphere is tense, and this part of the road movie occurs all over Tamil Nadu. And then we get to the second part, which features a Bolivian woman named Tanya, played by Diva Dhawan. And what's interesting is that Prakash is still the anti-protagonist. It's the women who make things happen to him. In the first part, it's Yatrama who makes things happen to him. In this section, it's Tanya who makes things happen to him. So he is, in a sense, the anti-protagonist. He's not the active guy who makes things happen. He's the passive guy to whom things happen. Now, obviously, because we are jumping from the very tense Yatrama bit to the Bolivian woman bit, the Tanya bit, the initial portion seems a little bit jarring because there is a sense of continuity of tone, because here too there is a sense of tenseness at the beginning. There are cops involved and all that, but gradually the movie begins to calm down. It begins to breathe. It begins to slow down. And this at first for me was a bit of a shock, because we are always in Prakash's mind, except for that brief bit where we took off with Yatrama, right? We are always in Prakash's mind. We are his point of view. We are following his point of view. So this change of pace, the slowing down, is as much a shock to the system, to Prakash, as it is to us, the audience. The road trip continues, but now it becomes international, and we see one echo from earlier, which makes it clear how the movie has changed from an artificial kind of world to a more natural kind of world. Earlier in Prakash's life, he joined a yoga class and the woman was saying things like inhale, exhale, and all those kinds of things. And it was inside a closed room, and you had this, these exotic yoga classes with, scented candles or whatever. It's one of those, high posh kind of things. Whereas later, when the same words come from a woman, inhale, exhale, it's in a much more organic, much more natural environment. When 2001 A Space Odyssey released, they said that the best way to watch the movie was to smoke up a joint and kind of lie back and enjoy the whole thing, because it's this big philosophical thing, and it's just going to wash over you, and it's best to not be in your senses while you're watching it. I could actually make a case for why that might be what you need to do here as well. But the Tanya part, this Bolivian woman part, is the one part of the movie that did not work too well for me. This is the woman who teaches Prakash to enjoy nature. She's the one who urges him to live in the present. This character is this hippie that we've known and seen in movies like, let's say, Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara, where this Hrithik Roshan is this uptight business person, and then he does this one plunge into the water, and then he comes up and he's like, oh my god, life is so marvelous. Now, this is not as simplistic as that and as reductive as that, but the message is still a little obvious. It's a little too on the nose. It's a little greeting cardy. In fact, the whole inhale, exhale thing, that sums up this whole thing much better than the events that actually unfold in this section. And then we get to the final section, the brilliant final section, where Prakash, like his name means, actually finds the light he's been after all his life without his even knowing it. Prakash is not scared anymore, and Pradeep Antony is perfect as this man who finally becomes the active protagonist of his own life, instead of always being the passive man who's being told what to do by the company, by his mother, by everyone else. Now, you might take a pause here and say, is this really the best way to find yourself? Can everyone take off on an international trip like this, or trips like these? Can't we just find inner peace in other ways? For example, Tanya says, forget your friends and family and just go by yourself. Every year, dedicate 30 days to yourself and travel and do whatever and just be yourself. Is this really practical? I was actually reminded of a Tamira episode where Karu Parniyappan meets this guy. He talks to this guy who hates his job, and he says, you don't like your job. The first thing you have to do then is to buy a house, because the minute the EMIs start coming in, you have to pay the EMIs, you will start loving your job. But then Vaazhl is not a literal movie in that sense. It is a philosophical movie. It is a metaphorical movie. It is something that you have to take at a higher level. Now, one person who clearly loved his job in this movie is the composer Pradeep Kumar. It has been a very long time since I saw a movie score so much in sync with the narrative of a movie. The music seems to be a part of the film's DNA, as if Arun knew exactly where he wanted sounds and exactly where he wanted silence. And unlike our usual big background scores, this just flows with the film. It's as if the film is flowing and the music score is the bank that just follows it, that hugs it throughout. And this happens even when the music itself stands out a bit. For example, when Prakash meets Yatrama, there are jati sounds that segue into the Nadaswaram and the acoustic guitar, and this is not a very traditional, like invisible kind of sound. You notice it, right? But it still flows with the film. And I really like this conceit of this Bolivian woman being so much in touch with Tamil culture that she is able to belt out a song written by Arunagirinathar. And I'm saying this and I'm bringing this to your attention because if you haven't seen it, Pradeep Kumar has made a wonderful documentary called Arunagiri Perumale, and I don't know where it is right now, but do seek it out if you like music. Another major contributor is the cinematographer Shelley Kallus. We already saw what he did with Arun Prabhu Purushothaman in Aruvi. If you were to sum up their approach in a rather reductive way, it would be that the camera angles are just a little off. They're not bizarre camera angles or anything like that. They're not like totally all over the place, but there's just this little disturbance that suggests that something is a little off, and that seems to sum up the approach. And now in this section of the review, let's examine something that might be a little too much for somebody who's just making his second movie. Are there auteur touches involved? Now consider Yatra, the kid. He's ADD, he's hyper, he's kind of, Prakash at one point asks if the kid is autistic. That's how he is in the city. But as he moves further and further away from the city and into nature and into those totally away from civilization parts, the kid calms down and becomes just like any other kid, any other very well behaved kid. We saw this in Aruvi too, because Aruvi was happy when she was in her village with her father and mother and all that, and the minute she moved to the city, away from the peace of the village and the nature and all that surrounded the village, she became this slightly different person. Auteur touch number 2. APP really likes to play with her film's tone. Now take Prakash's sister. She has a love affair in the film and it is treated both as slapstick and as drama. I was reminded of the AIDS subplot in Aruvi, which was treated not with pity and sympathy until the very end, which doesn't work for me at all, but the rest of the film is magnificent. But there, the AIDS subplot is treated with even humor. And here, and in Vaazhl, there's a killing that results in the film going in a totally different direction from what you'd usually expect in a film that has a murder in an early scene. Auteur touch number 3. APP specializes in films, or his way of thought is not what you would call logical. You don't watch these films completely as rational films, like that spin the bottle round in Aruvi, for instance. You don't watch it saying that this is actually rationally, logically happening. It seems to be a certain leap of faith, a certain leap of imagination is happening there. Here too, there is a point where Prakash has to make some calls from some place, and I wasn't actually sure whether he really was making those calls or whether he was hallucinating that he was making those calls. There's another place where two people meet after being separated in a jungle kind of environment for a really long time, and a logical mind, a rational mind would say, oh my god, what is this? How would they randomly run into each other? And then you think about this wonderful story about a pigeon that's been narrated much earlier by a much older man, and how it found its way home. That's exactly how these two people find their way home to each other. In other words, if you believe that pigeon story, you should have no problem believing this bit either. Another auteur touch: if there was somebody who was the target of the satire in the first film, there's somebody else that's the target of a satire here. He's a comedian, he's a former playwright, he's acted in films, he's a politician, and I'm just leaving it there. Another auteur touch, APP really likes his films to say something. Once again, after Aruvi, he proves that he's a very, very sophisticated message movie maker. No, scratch that actually. His movies are not about simple message, simple placard holding messages saying, do this, don't do that, this is good for you, that is not good for you, this is good for the world, that is not good for the world. His films are about philosophies, and these films, his narration is about, it's an encapsulation of these philosophies and also an extension of these philosophies. The final auteur touch is something that doesn't quite work for me. It's not a deal breaker, but I think that APP likes to hammer home his messages a little too hard. He likes to overemphasize what he wants to say. He likes to keep saying things that he's already told or things that we have already sensed, but the reason that it's not a deal breaker is because the rest of the film is so magnificent, so wonderful, and such a trip to be on. I mean, literally, it's such a trip to be on. But when you come away from the film, despite all its faults, very minor faults for me, nothing really was a deal breaker in this film for me. When you come away from the film, it is with the satisfaction of having something, of having seen something with a superb sense of cinematic craft and with storytelling courage, which is the most important thing. That's it about Vaazhl. See you soon in the next episode, and keep watching Film Companion South.